My name is Dr. Kimberly Ernest, and we are here with the How to Be Happy Hour on National Horror Movie Day as we talk about all things spooky. I am an Executive Vice President of Pennsylvania Counseling Services, licensed psychologist, and licensed professional counselor, and we are going to unpack the most horrifying things out there in the popular media.
I am Kendall Jones. I'm the Senior Director of Grant-Funded Programs at Pennsylvania Counseling Services.
What's your favorite scary movie? I didn't go either.
No, go ahead.
My favorite scary movie, Night of the Living Dead. Because I like funny horror.
Cabin by the Lake.
Ooh.
Which isn't really like horror, but it's
creepy.
Fucked.
Yeah. I'm Kristen Wortluft. I am outpatient therapist, case management supervisor, direct developmental supervisor, and at York Psych and Allison Hill. And I would say my favorite is anything Michael Myers. Yeah, he's great.
I'm V. Kwan, family-based clinical consultant at PA Counseling Services, and my all-time favorite film is Hellraiser.
I'm Brandon Wolf. I am a video editor for Pennsylvania Counseling Services. I like all things horror movies, but specifically I like all the behind-the-scenes stuff. But my favorite one is definitely a toss-up. It's either Psycho or Nightmare on Elm Street. Because I like Psycho for what it is, but I like Nightmare because of the lore implication it has.
Yeah. Do you know what? I was just watching. So I went a couple weeks ago. We go to Halloween Horror Nights every year at Universal Studios.
I love that so much.
And I've gone with my dad for the last 12 years. It's our thing. I know that there are probably families with less fucked up traditions, but that's ours. And we make it happen every year, no matter what. And one of the things that they were talking about this time was one of the most iconic scenes in any horror movie of all times is the 1938 or something, like the 1930s version of The Invisible Man.
Yes.
And they talked about how one of the houses that you walked through had the different versions of The Invisible Man, but how they actually filmed it rather than what it actually was. And they talked about how still to this day, you watch a lot of old horror movies and they don't hold up.
Yeah.
But the transition of like the unwrapping of his head in The Invisible Man with how they had to cut it out with an X-Acto razor and like splice it together, like still to this day is one of the best renderings in any horror film of all times.
Yeah, that scene is still like gobsmackingly awesome to look at, even nowadays with all the CGI.
Yeah.
And another thing with Universal, like there's one of the best like werewolf transformations you'll find, practical effects, American Werewolf in London. It is so fantastic, and it's really like hard to watch, but it's so cool to see like the different practical effects they do, because it's not like way back in the old days where they would just like piece makeup on Lon Chaney Jr. They would just like over time just dissolve into different makeup effects. This is like all practical, like bones being pushed out, snout being made. It's like, it is impressive.
Isn't that one also impressive because they showed the transition back into humanness him?
I'm not quite sure. That's a movie.
Is it that film or?
I don't. I know that's a movie I still need to see. I just know all like the amazing practical effects, because that's like what makes a good horror movie good. Like CGI is helpful, but like if you can mix in practical effects, that's what really makes it a good horror movie, and any movie in general.
So in preparation for today, I came up with a list, or I Googled, and this is what the internet has told me are the most iconic horror movies of all times. And so I'm just going to run through it and why it's regarded as such. So the very first one is Psycho from the 1960s, which I thought was interesting that we didn't start until the 1960s, because there's so many horror films that came before, like the original Mummy, the Frankenstein's Monster, all the different... Jekyll and Hyde, but none of those made the list, like the initial Universal monsters. It's Hitchcock, which, I mean, obviously had a huge stake in the field. But one of the most influential horror movies of all times. Then it goes into The Shining, based on Stephen King's novel, and how it's obviously a cult classic when it comes to the horror films. Then we go into The Exorcist, which actually is from 1973, so it's from before The Shining, but it's known for its frightening portrayal of demonic possession. And I know prior to us filming even, we were talking about how that tends to be one of the most terrifying, well, for some, I mean, I think you had said that like demon possession. For me, it's like real humans doing really horrifying, like The Purge, like because I believe in the fundamental darkness of the human spirit. I love that you think that we need to be possessed by demons to do terrible things. Nightmare on Elm Street, Freddy Krueger, because he had such a long-lasting impact on the genre.
Yeah.
Halloween, this is when Michael Myers comes on the scene, and the film that popularized the slasher genre. And then we go into Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And then we jump forward a little bit with the next one being Get Out by Jordan Peele. A modern horror film that got critical acclaim for both the direction it took the genre as well as addressing important societal and social issues. The Conjuring got a lot of attention and has gained popularity. Didn't they just come out with a new Conjuring? In the last year or two?
So, yeah.
After that, Babadook, for its horror just being a standout in the genre. And then last but not least, being one of the most, praised as being one of the most disturbing movies of all times, Hereditary.
It is pretty
I've
disturbing.
heard about that, yeah.
Yeah, that one's pretty, and I love Toni Collette. So, I mean, to me, she's one of the most versatile actors
Yeah.
making movies right now. And when I saw she was in it, I was like, huh.
Yeah, talk about possession, but killing yourself while you're possessed.
I'll have to watch
It was,
that.
yes.
It's horrifying.
Yes.
What surprised me, like, I was thinking about this. Scream's not on that list. Like,
No.
Scream.
Neither is Insidious.
Yeah, and like Scream is
Yeah.
what really popularized the slasher genre after it kind of went into a dull, like, comatose state. And like with Wes Craven behind the helm, who directed Nightmare, it's interesting why that's not on there because it popularized the slasher genre once again, but also made fun of it because of how the characters act in the movie or how they all know the cliches. It's kind of interesting to see like the popular zeitgeist of. Granted, I'm like a horror movie person, so I know like different zeitgeist than the standard worldwide zeitgeist. So it's interesting to see like what more people think are classic, like what they define as like cult-defining horror movies, rather than what I think of it as. Because my odds are going to be different. Because yeah, like you said, I'm surprised there's no like Universal monster movie on there because those are genre-defining, but they're slightly outdated because they're older stories.
Yeah, you would think. I mean, I was surprised not to see it on there because
Yeah.
that is the top grossing horror movie of all times. And there's been how many versions? Oh, we all Chucky. Because none of these go into that like comedic horror, which I think is a genre in and of itself. And my favorite genre is that comedic horror style.
You say that in like Nightmare after I think the first three slowly transitioned into that, making Freddy more of a smart aleck with how he responds to his victims. So it started off like a little bit more serious and somewhat grounded in reality, minus the second one. But it started getting more jokey because they needed to put a new spin on him. And that's interesting that it's still listed there as like popular because of the franchise, but not many people remember that it starts slowly going into comedic horror after a while. And then they kill him off, bring him back, and he's been dormant ever since the reboot came out.
Yeah, I'm not sure. So we, in my research, we also started looking at like the pros and cons of horror films and horror consumption. And so I found myself wondering, are the people around this table inherently sick because we enjoy?
Yes, absolutely.
I've
accepted that.
because we volunteered to discuss the most horrific and terrifying point. So what does it say about us as human beings that this is something that we're drawn to, we enjoy the lore of, and how do we make sense of the interest in, you know, somebody who like shoves his big needly fingers through your bed at night, or a doll that murders people and is possessed, or, you know, a clown that eats children. My 5-year-old looked at me the other day because my 7-year-old is really into all the horror things. We don't let him watch anything, but the lore and the idea of it, he's real into. And my 5-year-old is not into any of it, but he has a big brother, so he knows about all of it. And he looked at me really worried, and he said, "Mom, I'm worried because if we were in Chucky's world, you would be dead because Chucky kills all the adults. But if we were in Pennywise's world, I would be dead because Pennywise eats children. He's like, and I'm wondering if there's a horror movie in which we would both be safe. I don't think so, buddy. Like, I don't
Thing
think
about
that's
horror
kind of the
movies.
thing. And as I thought about it, I was like, I don't think there is one in which we would both be inherently safe.
The only one I could think of is more of like a family horror would be Ernest Scared Stupid.
Maybe that. So what does it say about human beings excited and drawn to the lore of horror?
Yeah. I mean, it's like an adrenaline rush. You just anticipate and just that waiting for that thing to happen. Yeah.
I look at it as a challenge. Like, go ahead and try to scare me. I try to find the most terrifying movies ever, and it's very hard to find.
Is there one you won't rewatch? Or that you turned off? You're like, yep, you did it.
No,
up to
there's
you.
there's some that I'm like, okay. There's like scenes of it though. So like Sinister. That one had me when I thought it was a real human person, like heinously murdering families in such like a awful way. And then they ruined it at the end because they made it like supernatural. And I was like, now you ruined it. It's no longer scary to me. It was scary when it was like a real live human, you know, hanging a family in their backyard. And now it's like, no, you lost me. And then Insidious, when the baby's upstairs in the crib and the mom hears the whatever it was, the monster, in the room with the baby. And it's like, now you got to either run up there and save your baby knowing there's a monster chilling at his crib, or you could take off and like maybe not be mom of the year. But like that's just
What
a
did she do?
terrifying. She went upstairs. But that's like a terrifying like choice. Like put yourself in her shoes. It's like, okay, you know that there's like some vicious demon up there with your child and you've got to go get that child. So like pieces like that I find like, okay, that's terrifying for like real life reasons. Freddy, just the concept of like not having control over your dreams and him coming at you in your vulnerable state and like, you know, killing you viciously in the corner of your bedroom. That's like scary stuff, but it's hard to find like a movie that's like that the whole way through, I think.
I know it's definitely more popular nowadays because of the whole lore and theory building aspect that I think kids a little bit younger than me and my generation like to go into, because there's some things that don't ever get sequels or remakes, that it's just its own standalone world and you have to like theorize, well, why did this happen? What was the cause and effect of this? Whereas movies that have like multiple sequels and a franchise behind it, the world's kind of set in stone, but you can still make theories and make the lore implications off of that, but they're not as concrete because they either go against what the directors have canonicized in the film, or they don't make a lick of sense when it's like a completely batshit insane theory. I remember when...
Have you ever seen the theory that likened Pennywise to Mary Poppins?
I have not seen that theory. No, that's an
And they
interesting one.
run through all the different ways in which, and there's a lot of overlap. Like Pennywise comes around every 27 years, and Mary Poppins is like every 24 years, and like Pennywise uses like the little toy boat to draw in children, and Mary Poppins uses like the toy airplane, like the paper airplane, like, and it's all the different points of overlap between Pennywise and Mary Poppins, theorizing that they're actually creatures from the same dimension.
Well, I think that's what makes clowns so scary.
Yeah.
Like that's what I think sets them apart from like other characters. Like they're all predators, but like clowns like pretend they're not. They pretend they're your friend. They give you balloons and stuff, and it's like ew.
Red ones specifically.
Yeah. It's gross.
So that's why killer clowns became popular too, because even though they weren't really clowns, they were aliens disguised as clowns that made people into cotton candy to later suck their blood out. Again, the tangent makes no sense, but again, people afraid of clowns, it's just a kind of continuing thing because of the whole thing with It and Pennywise, and it just like spawned from that. And you can see that in just popular culture, because Chucky from Rugrats, he's scared of clowns. Any reason? He's just scared of them. They look scary. It's just a little kid who's scared of clowns, and that's some people may not have like the actual like strong fear of it. It's just like, I don't like that, so I don't want to be near it. It's like, I personally have like a small fear of spiders. If they're near me, I don't mind them. Like a daddy longlegger, I appreciate it because it eats other insects. I'm not going to destroy it. If I see like a half an inch like spider crawling around, I'll avoid it, but if it starts coming near me, I might squash it or run the other direction. They're just I know they're not going to hurt me, but it's still a little terrifying to see something crawling at you when you're doing nothing but sitting on your couch.
The fear of clowns, because I looked this up specifically because it to me was the most terrifying movie of my childhood. And I think I mean, I was afraid of everything as a kid, so it doesn't surprise me. Pet Cemetery was also pretty terrifying. I was also afraid of Under Siege 2, so there's a lot of, things I was afraid of as a child. But it's called coulrophobia. And it's actually a pretty common fear, specifically because of their uncanny and exaggerated appearance, their hidden identity that makes it difficult to discern their intentions, masks, which I know is your favorite thing in the world, their exaggerated facial expressions and body movements are unsettling to many. Okay. The historical associations, so like It or Killer Clowns from Outer Space, or I mean, I go like the practical, like John Wayne Gacy.
I literally thought of that as soon as you said about the makeups. Like he was the first thing that came to my mind.
John Wayne Gacy, that was a serial killer that was a clown at children's birthday parties. Yeah. Loss of control, that clowns are unpredictable and chaotic, and then media portrayals such as Stephen King's It, which is
Terrifier is also a clown.
Yes.
It. All right, there it is.
And he is far more terrifying to me than Pennywise. I will just put that out there. Yeah.
Agreed.
Pennywise got me like coming and going. Like I was afraid of Pennywise as a child because he ate children, and then the movie came back out again. Like what? 3 years ago, 2 years ago, right after I had children. And so now Pennywise is going to eat my children. Gotcha. So it went from me being eaten to now you're going to eat my kids. And just the timing of the release of those films. Yeah.
I think it's definitely interesting because at the time, you were a kid, so you would have been in the kid situation, but now you're an adult, you're kind of more in the adult situation that even though it may come after your kids, it may be secretly coming after you technically because you were the initial target. I don't think any of the people in It had children until after Pennywise was defeated. I don't know if anything was implicit by that, but it's interesting to think of. It's a generational thing, and as we know for many movies nowadays, generational trauma is the main supervillain in a lot of movies nowadays. So it's interesting to tie something that's more prevalent now back to a movie that was 20 or 30 years ago, back in the 80s, I think. But it's interesting to see that.
Do I have that? I might have it. 2017.
That was the remake, yeah.
Was the remake, and then 2019 was Chapter 2. And they're coming out with what? Welcome to Derry?
Yeah, like a mini-series about Pennywise.
His origin story.
Oh.
And that's what the most recent Chucky show was about, was about Chucky's origin story. So now we're going into and contextualizing it. My 7-year-old was asking me about Michael Myers and why does Michael Myers kill everyone? And I forgot the beginning, and we were in a line somewhere and he was asking me about it, and I was like, yeah, I think his sister gets murdered, and then after that he murders everyone that reminds him of his sister, and he's like, so he's really not a bad dude, he just has some trauma. And I'm like, man, you're a psychologist, kid. I don't know what to do about that. And then my husband, later he's like, he kills his sister. And I was like, oops, I messed up.
Yeah, Judith is the first victim. I feel.
Yeah. But it is the Rob Zombie Michael Myers ones show a really to that, it is childhood trauma that leads him to kill his older sister. So that's what I like about that movie, is it really shows a lot of his backstory, the type of childhood he had. So that just, builds up this character of why he turned into a psychopath, what led that up. And oftentimes it is this severe childhood trauma. So I really like that about that particular movie. and many other things. Rob Zombie's great.
I still find the original one more terrifying because, as far as you know,
He's
Michael
great.
came from like a fine family, like no abuse or anything, and
yeah.
just one day just up and murders his
Snaps.
sister.
Yeah.
Like, why? There's nothing explaining why he did it, and the psychiatrist that he's like assigned can't figure out why. That's why Dr. Loomis he wants eventually just move on from Michael because he can't do anything to help him. And so I think that's more scary than showing that coming from a traumatic family or something.
Yeah.
But then that's kind of stereotyping all psychopaths must come from abuse families and stuff like that, which may not be the proper context, but I think some people can see it that way. It's a recent shooter in the news, well, they may have came from a traumatic family that abused them. It's I don't think that's correct, but the assumption is there because of how movies implicate on the current culture of the world, I guess.
It's a really good point.
No, I like the theme of those intergenerational patterns and how they are played out across horror films, and I think we see it in It. What was it was the recent Netflix miniseries about.
Follow the House of Usher.
No, I want to see
That
that.
is
so good.
I just
Have
finished
you
it
watched it?
yesterday.
Dang it, I haven't watched it yet.
It is so good.
Well, you know how I feel about the Sackler family, so
It is
I feel like
Can't do it.
amazing.
I feel like it could be quite satisfying, truthfully.
I almost drop kicked my TV 3 episodes into Dope Sick because I was so angry. So, yeah.
I just
I'll
love
stay-
Edgar Allan Poe.
But how connected is it to the Poe story? I was
All of
wondering
it.
that. Okay.
Like everything is connected.
It's like Easter eggs throughout, right?
Yeah, but
That's good.
big ones, one of the characters is Annabelle Lee. The granddaughter is Lenore. There's a raven everywhere. There's a Pit and the Pendulum reference. But then
Okay.
there's these little teeny tiny things that you wouldn't know. Everybody knows about the raven and that, but unless you have read Poe or are sitting with someone who tells you the answer to everything, you wouldn't know. So a lot of it seems just normal, and then it is all Poe. It's amazing.
How gory is it?
Uh,
I've heard
Only
it's very
when they
creative in the way people die.
die, but other than that, it's really not. And I like 'cause
Only
it's
when they
not.
die.
Oh, yeah, I mean
that's
it's
true.
just
Yeah.
it is
Yeah.
it's only when they die. But did you finish it?
Oh yeah.
Okay, so I was 100% in until the very end when the sister comes out, and I was like, "What the fuck?"
That did
The
catch me off
supernatural
guard.
thing comes
Yes.
out of nowhere.
Yeah. That's what
Completely
Sinister
ruins
did to
it.
me. Yeah. I was like,
And
come
then,
on.
but you're 8 episodes into it, and you love it because it's got all of this historical Poe things in, and then all of a sudden she turns into a zombie or something stupid, and you're just come on, man! We got 5 minutes left.
Are there any
5
dragons
minutes.
at
No.
any point in time?
No.
Then I don't know that I'm into it.
No dragons.
I prefer the dragons.
No dragons. Creative dying.
So I was wondering how connected it was because I know way back in the day, Universal made a bunch of films on the Poe stories. They made Pin and the Pendulum, Telltale Heart, I think was one of them. I know Roger Corman made one that had Boris Karloff in. I can't remember. I think it was actually they made a Fall of the House of Usher as well too. But they adapted the story, but they didn't fully adapt it. From what I remember hearing, it's kind of weird because how are you adapting a short story into an hour and a half long movie? It's it's kind of up in the hill.
Like
I mean, this was
8-episode miniseries.
9 hours long.
Oh, jeez.
But I think most people that know the story of the Sackler family will find it to be quite satisfying. is
And
what
you
I've been told.
actively hate all of them.
Wow.
Except the dad. I loved the dad.
I do actively hate all of
I
them.
loved him so much.
Yeah, checks out.
But
Yeah, it works.
Already there.
They are very hateable, but each in their own unique
Yes.
way. They're each their own new little unique snowflake that you want to fucking strangle.
That's how you know the actors do a good job. That you
Yeah.
despise the characters
Yeah.
they're playing.
Except
I love
the
when
dad.
the
I
actors
loved
do
the
that.
dad.
That brings me to the most hateable characters of all time, because I think even they're even in our most horrific horror movies, you fall in love with some of the villains, the most villainous villain. Who doesn't love Chuck? I love Chucky.
Yeah, he's hilarious.
And he would cut me in half with with a little baby chainsaw if he could. Or I'm thinking of it was interesting you talked about the psychologist, and so I hate depictions of any psychologist in any movie that's ever been made. There's never been a good one. And my least favorite is fucking Silence of the Lambs.
Oh, okay.
And
Clarice.
Darling.
Yes.
Clarice. But like, who doesn't love Anthony Hopkins?
Yeah.
In that? I mean, like the most villainous villain.
Yeah.
And who doesn't, like, you love him. Or I did, anyway. I don't know. Well, maybe I should unpack that in therapy. I don't know.
No, I love him too.
Who doesn't love him?
So, I mean, I'm
He got me
wondering-
interested in this field, so.
Same here.
That just goes to show you like how good of an actor Hopkins is, because he's
Yeah.
not only taking the original source material from the novel, but he's giving it his own spin. And why else would they bring him back for all of the sequels they made based off of the books? He's iconic as Hannibal Lecter.
Yes.
Even when the TV show Hannibal came out, people praised the main actor for portraying him, but I'm still thinking people are like, I enjoy this, but Hopkins is over here doing Hopkins, so it's kind of hard to top that. But this actor still does what he does best and is doing a good role, and that's always a thing, especially for remakes, comparing the original actor to the newer actor, because there's always going to be disputes like, well, this person did it better, well, this person made it more scarier. Is like, correct, but which one gave you the better enjoyment as a character rather than what they put on the screen or how they act as the character? Because I can always tell you, while I enjoy Robert Englund as Freddy, because he is literally the face of
He is
Freddy.
Freddy, yeah.
Haley, Jackie Earle Haley is a good actor, but when I saw the makeup on him for Freddy, it did not look good. Like, it just, he looked like a burn victim, but it just, for his face structure, it just didn't fit him. And then there's always the debate, who's the best Jason? Well, if we're going by longevity, there's Kane Hodder, who's always behind the mask from parts 4 to 10, I think. He's the most popular Jason actor, but people like the first one because, spoiler alert, Jason didn't kill in the first movie. It was his mother. Mrs. Voorhees was the killer in the first Friday the 13th. Jason got a surprise at the end by killing the survivor, which was a kind of like a dream sequence. But then you have people just like, well, I like this character because I like what they do. Is like, cool, but do you appreciate the actor for making you appreciate the character on the screen and making you feel like you despise them for what they're doing, but they do a good job enough that you can look past the devilish deeds that they do?
I'm trying to think of my most hated character of all times. I probably have to go with Ramsay Bolton from Game of Thrones. I think Ramsay Bolton, if I were to like pick one that I thought was just despicable. Now that's not horror, but I feel like even in like the horror genre, I can't.
Pick one.
Norma Bates. But the one from the miniseries.
Oh, from-
she is like
from Bates
the
Motel.
mother-in-law from hell.
Yeah.
Well,
After mine.
that might be some of your own
That's
trauma.
okay, so that's me. But no, she's like whiny. She's in love with her kid. Like she doesn't really do anything. She just who she is as a person. I hate her.
Yeah.
I still need to see Bates Motel because I enjoy Psycho, but I still need to watch that miniseries.
Yeah, and she's different in that than she is in like the books and the movies. Not that I liked her in those, but in the show, like you really hate her because she's really whiny.
I think that's why I only made it through a couple episodes.
Yeah, she was terrible.
Yeah, she got on my nerves.
Yeah, she does.
I think that might have been the point because in the movie, like you don't see her obviously until the end because you just hear her screaming for Norman. Like you don't really know how she is as a character, but you hear her arguing with Norman back and forth a couple of times. So it's interesting to see what not only the creators did with the show, taking from the book and the movie, but also trying to make it seem like this character will turn into what we would later see because of their actions that have happened. And that's always a good thing I like to see in horror movies, like what's the cause and effect that gets person from A to B. And if something comes along and screws that up and like severs the line, but as long as they can reconnect it and make it work, then fine. But if not, you may lose an audience member there because of the different connections.
So it needs to be hateable, but not so hateable that you don't finish. What about you? What's the most hated?
No, I'm trying to think of it. Oh no, I have to think of that.
Yeah, I
Freddie
can't.
was my guy. Like I don't know if you guys remember in the 1980s, the 800, 900 numbers. You
Yeah.
can call
Oh, yeah.
Jason, you can call Freddie. And it's 99 cents a minute. And I thought if I hang up before the minute, they won't charge me. Until my dad walked in and I got punished for life because put up like it was like a couple $100 film.
Oh my
now.
gosh.
Like, what was you? Did you talk to
Freddie.
Freddie? I don't know who would be like I have to think about that.
That's I'm in your same boat. I can't think of like the most hateable like horror person. Like I can think of like characters I despise because of their actions, like just all of the dumb town people that don't listen to the main character or any of the warnings and just go out and do what they're not supposed to. But a singular character, like I can't remember. There's a good show I can't remember. Like I despised the character, and I loved the actor because they did such a good job of making me despise
hate
this
the
character,
character.
and I just can't remember what it was.
Yeah, to your point about the other people in it, I think the newer Halloween, the one that came out like right in the middle of COVID, does a really great job depicting how people in masses and filled with panic become very dumb. And it was like perfect timing of when that movie came out, and I was like, I love this. And I got so mad at the townspeople, like, because they ended up killing this innocent person. Because of mass hysteria. And I was like, gosh, they did such a great job. I just remember Jamie Lee Curtis being like, sheep. And I'm like, yes. But I will say the clown in Terrifier, I don't even know his name. I hate that guy. He's like, he's not like even a clown that you would like see at a child's birthday party. He's just
I have to
like,
look him up after this. I've not seen the film.
it's awful. Like, and not in a scary way. Like, it's not scary. It could be very scary to some people. It's not scary to me. I just find it more like this, like, creepy guy that just, like, wears this awful, like, he's really dirty and, like, paints the walls with his own fecal matter. He's just, like, really yucky. And then he just, like, also is a predator towards women. And does really heinous crimes. So yeah, he just probably like, everything about his character is just like gross. Because I guarantee there's someone for real doing that, like as we speak. So it's like, I could definitely see him being like a real life criminal.
He's like a cracked out John Wayne Gacy.
Yeah.
Totally cracked out.
But like, he doesn't ever paint that picture
Yeah.
of like being the good clown. He's just
I mean,
always
he smiles though. He's like,
but he's got black, like,
Yeah,
bloody
black.
teeth.
Black
Yeah,
teeth,
like,
yes.
black, like, he hasn't brushed his teeth in ever. Ever, yeah.
yeah.
It's rough.
I think I know my dude. Leprechaun.
Ooh.
Fucking hate that dude. It could be because I watched him when I was 4.
Yes.
But just his little, I just want to kick him.
So fun fact, the actor who played Leprechaun, I think, I'm pretty sure I'm right on this. It's the same guy who did Wicket the Ewok in Star Wars.
Oh, really?
And Willow from Willow. I think it's the same actor who does it, Warren
didn't know
Davis.
that.
So yeah, just weird horror, just weird connections. And also another connection, which is probably well known from this, but Janet Leigh from Psycho, the main girl that gets killed off within the first 15 minutes of the movie, is the mother of Jamie Lee Curtis. I know that's a lot. It's like for most people that's common horror knowledge, but that's an interesting connection between one of the most famous slasher victims to
One of the first
one of the
victims
first victims in a slasher that's popularized, but also a strong survivor. Especially looking at the H40 timeline, as I like to call it, that takes place 40 years after the first movie.
Yeah. And it's really cool in the Rob Zombie movies. Danielle Harris is the character, like Annie. And she is the little girl in the last Michael Myers, the one that dresses like the clown. Then she's like she doesn't speak in, I think, 5. She's like, she kills her sister. But yeah, that little girl in like the second part of the old original Halloween ones.
The Thorn trilogy, as it's called.
Yeah, she is Danielle Harris, and she's one of the main characters. She's Annie in the Rob Zombie Halloween. So it's really cool
That's
that
right,
they
I
like
remember
connected
that,
that. Yep.
I think the horror genre probably does one of the best jobs of having like those little Easter eggs threaded throughout. And I think it has the biggest fandom that will react negatively if you don't like follow the script. Like I remember when they recently released the Last of Us,
Yeah.
like the show, and how different it was. Because I remember, like, I'm not a gamer, but my husband is, and so I remember like sitting on the couch. I would always sit on the couch and read my book while he would be playing whatever he was playing. And I remember I would get sucked into The Last of Us all the time because the plot and the story of the game was one of the first games that I think that I watched him play that I felt like really had an almost like cinematic plot to it. And then they just released the Last of Us show within the last year, and a lot of folks reacted really negatively because it didn't like track in terms of the lore. So it received a lot of criticism for that, which I thought was interesting. Because this is the one genre that like will burn you down if you don't.
Yeah.
It's like the movie's never as good as the book.
But it never is.
Never is. Never.
Well, then you get the ones that the movies outshadow the book. Because look at Silence of the Lambs. A lot of people think of that more than the book. Same with
A lot of people can't read though, so.
Also true.
Because like Psycho, the Psycho book, like many people know about it, but more people know about Hitchcock's movie because of the cultural relevance and what he did to make it more known so people can know the ending.
Yeah.
Like there's a really good documentary about the making of Psycho that I watched. It was a movie about the making of the movie, and it had like real actors in it. And there's some documentaries too where he would literally go out of the way, I think for his production team, would go to bookstores, buy every single copy of Psycho so no one could buy it before the movie came out. And when the movie did release, once the theater was filled, they locked the door so no one could get into the theater to spoil the rest of the movie, because as soon as you got in, they didn't want you to leave and miss any of the movie or figure out the twist ending. So like just the different tactics that these filmmakers take, at least
They locked people into
I
a
think
theater.
that's how you get murdered.
Yeah.
well, I think they locked the doors to the
Scarier than the movie.
They locked the doors to the front of the theater. I think.
100%.
Not like,
And then they lit a fire outside.
I don't think it was like the theater itself. I think it was like the doors to the entrance of the theater that they locked. Like to the theater itself, because people would have to leave to go to the bathroom, obviously. I think it was just like the main entrance that they locked. But if they did that, that'd be a lot more scary.
I think the Dexter franchise, I think the show was better than the books.
I never read the books. I didn't read the Dexter books.
And I didn't like the end of the Dexter franchise. Like Dexter was my very
Canada
favorite
Dexter?
show. Well, I liked the way they ended it. Like when they did the reprise like a year ago.
With his son.
Well, yeah, with
Okay.
Dexter's son. And I don't think it's over. I think it's all coming
Well, but they
back.
did like the Tony Soprano. Like, is he dead? Is he not? It was like the Sons of Anarchy.
Yeah.
Like, is Jackson
Hate
Teller
that.
dead? Is Tony
give
Soprano
me some
dead?
closure.
Nobody knows.
But I felt like the new version of Dexter, like,
He's dead.
well, yeah, he's definitely dead.
He's definitely dead
In the
this
Pacific
time.
Northwest, when they brought it back, the way it ended in Miami, I was like, I hate this show. And it
Yeah,
went
it
from
was
my
the exact
favorite show
same,
to
yeah.
being livid about the way they ended it. And then when they brought it back, it was a really reparative experience for me. I was like, okay,
Yeah, no,
it
I
all
do- I
makes
hate those
sense
endings.
now. I forgive you.
Same.
But I thought the book was like the book does the whole thing where at the end it becomes supernatural and like there's demon
Yes, yeah, no.
possession and it takes like that hard left because human
It
beings
ruins
can't
everything.
just be
Yeah.
bad.
Just leave him alone. It's scary enough.
Scary enough. No, we were talking before we started filming about this concept of like The Exorcist and the possession pieces. Has anyone seen the new Exorcist?
My
Yeah.
friend did, and she was disappointed.
Really?
Yes. Which now I'm disappointed, but I'm going to watch it anyway because I'm all about an Exorcist movie.
At Universal Studios this year, that was one of the houses. And I will tell you, that was like the scariest
Yeah.
house. It was
Yeah.
horrifying. But the commercials for it, like with the parents sitting there, like begging their kids to come back for that, I think, again, like there's certain ways in which I feel like art imitates life. And just sort of this concept of like kids lost in the disease of addiction. Like I've had those family sessions where it's the parent being like, but I miss you. Why won't you come back? And like, I'm like, man, I don't know that I can watch that. Like A Beautiful Boy with Steve Carell is one of the most heartbreaking movies. I think the book is where, oh my God, the book. But the movie was like devastating. And I see like a likeness or like general themes there. I don't remember what movie you said.
Yeah, I can't even remember what it's called. I stumbled across it on a streaming network, and it was about a girl who was in the midst of heroin addiction, and she did get possessed, and her family didn't even know the difference. They thought it was just her addiction, that she had relapsed, that she was just using again, and here she had been possessed. And the movie talks about how being in that state, being in active addiction makes you more susceptible to demonic possession, because you're not at your best. They always say the most vulnerable people are more at risk for possession. So they used addiction as an example of that weakened, vulnerable state, and how easy it is for demons to jump on in there. And I just thought that connection, because a lot of people refer to their addiction as their demon. So, that connection there was just really interesting to me, because I've seen, in sessions as well with my clients and everything, it is very similar. Yeah.
Because your loved one's not there.
Yeah.
It's not the same.
No, it's like looking at a different set of eyeballs. Yeah.
I saw when I was preparing for ethics this year, there was, I always look for outlandish ethical questions, because if I have to teach you about ethics for 6 hours, I have to find some way to make it interesting. And one of the questions that I stumbled upon was, if you came into contact with a demon-possessed doll, and the only way to rid yourself of demon possession is to give the doll to a child, would you do it? And I found without question.
Yeah, without
I was biting my tongue because I didn't want to be that guy.
For
So
sure.
I appreciate
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
And it's going to be like the child of a person that I can't fucking stand. Like, it's going to be a
Kids are suckers.
specific
They'll
child.
take
Oh yeah,
anything.
it's going to be like a very specific child.
So that's where the monkey's paw problem comes in, because if that happens, though, let's say you probably don't get to pick the child. The child might just happen upon you, and it may not be the child you're looking at. It just may be a random child.
Yeah, I'd probably be fine with that too. Actually.
I don't think that changes
Like
my
it
answer.
won't be as good, but yeah, sure.
Is that the only way that I can get rid of demon possession?
Yeah.
I think on that note, we should go to our questions now, because I'm surrounded by sociopaths. Is that door still locked?
Yeah, we made sure.
I smell fire.
So some of the questions that were submitted today, I thought were particularly thoughtful. One of the ones, are there specific horror movies or horror films or subgenres that are particularly recommended for or cautioned against in the context of mental health therapy or intervention?
I'll definitely throw my hat and say, like, a lot of psychological ones could be, like Get Out, Us. I'm throwing Split in there, even though it's not really a horror movie. It's still psychological because of the multiple personalities. Anything like that, because there's still, like, you can still be terrified by the boogeyman or by a random slasher that's going house to house killing people. But I think the real thing is to worry about, like, your own mental health. And if you stumble upon a character that might have the same symptoms that you do, that you could be either triggered or find comfort in knowing that they can either fight the demons themselves with the help of friends or family. But if it goes down the wrong path, you might be able to dissociate with them as like, well, I'm not going to end up like them because I can do better.
What's the other one that depicts like the dissociative identity disorder? There's Split, and then there's another one that is like a scary movie.
Sybil. Is it Sybil?
That's
No.
what I was thinking too.
It like takes place out because it brings in like voodoo and stuff like that. I can never remember.
I never
the name.
heard of those.
Yeah, I actually like it more than I like Split, because it is more of like a scary movie, but it brings in that same concept of, there's a psychologist in it who's
I know,
examining.
I'm sure they're awful.
Yeah, who's examining.
Do they
for
sleep with their
cord.
patient? Because that's like the go-to move. Of
Yeah, I don't
pop.
think in this one because he was vicious. So I think she refrained.
There it is.
Yeah. But yeah, that's closely to your point there about that.
Human Centipede. You know,
Oh, God.
talk
Yeah.
about like psychological fuckery.
Yeah, that one.
Yeah. And I think in the first one, wasn't there a female victim that was crying for her mom? That did me in. Did me in. Yeah.
No, I think a lot of the, like, Human Centipede, any of the Saw franchise. I
Yeah.
mean, even though Saw is famous for, like, the worst acting in all of acting, this concept of like, what would you do to survive? And that has always been to me one of the most like psychological, because I think a lot of people like would give possessed dolls to children, for example. Like a lot of people would do some dark shit to survive.
Yeah.
And then I think that pulls into you, like, what would I do to survive? And in
Yeah.
what context? And like, what if my kids were at risk or this or that? And I remember right after the Saw movies were released, there was also like a Criminal Minds, I think it was, where a guy and his daughter get kidnapped. And do you remember that
Yes.
one? Man, that one fucked me
It
up.
was his daughter and like her 3 friends or something, right?
Yeah, something like, and like
Maybe that was
basically the killer makes the dad kill people to save his daughter and her friends.
Is that there were
think
in
I
like
remember
the
that.
empty pool?
And
right?
there's like a Fight Club
Yeah.
type situation. Yeah.
Wow.
And so it's like, how would you make that? Or what was the most recent? Knock at the Cabin Door? Was that the one where
With
it's like,
Shyamalan. That
one
was
of you
good.
needs to die or the whole world will end?
Yeah.
And like, how do you square that circle? And that always. The Purge. I think for
Purge.
sure if we had a
That could
purge,
happen.
I think a lot of people would show their ass, for lack of a better term. Like, they'd really show you who they are.
Yeah.
And every once in a while, it's like, maybe we should, just to see. And then we had the pandemic, and we saw.
Yeah.
That was proof enough.
Nope, I'm good now. I'm good.
Well, you say about the Purge because, like, you said about Night of the Living Dead being one of your favorites. That can be keyed into it as well because, in the face of like a giant like global terror, you see who these people truly are.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter who you are, where you came from, what your occupation is. If there's a giant epidemic, some people is like every man for himself. Some people band together. It's you don't know the real grit of a person until you meet them in like the hardest of hardest situations, and that's what it makes. The message of Night of the Living Dead is like extremely powerful because even at the end of the movie, it's not a happy ending. Like all the main characters are dead. The epidemic is still happening, and it's grim, but it's a hard message to remember that. And I just remember as the franchise went on, and it's still very like talking about popular culture because Dawn of the Dead, where's the main location? A shopping mall. During that time era, people were turning into zombies by just going back and forth through a daily life of just menial tasks. And it's just interesting to see if the zombie movie were to come back in full swing, it'd be filled with like the influencers and the
Let's bring it back.
I'm trying to think the
TikTok dance.
yeah,
I don't
exactly. Because there was to expect for that there was a Texas Chainsaw Massacre released on Netflix that was way too modern because it had influencers buying a town in Texas that had Leatherface living in it and with an old lady, and it made no sense. And it's just like, why are you trying to modernize this when the original film, as gruesome as it is, made the point across pretty well that it's not from what they are. It's anything can happen. It's not just what happens where you live. It's just weird why some things try to get modernized and it works, other things don't, and it tanks. So it's just hard to find a nice even balance between keeping a classic thing going or modernizing it and either alienating or actually making the audience like wise up to what your message is trying to say.
I think the scariest character in The Walking Dead, which is a zombie movie, like it's a show all about like the first 20 minutes, they're like eating the intestines of a live horse. Like it's horrifying. But I think the scariest character in the whole movie or the whole series is Negan.
Yes.
With Lucille, which like weirdly, I used to have a really big crush on that actor, and he totally ruined it.
Grey's Anatomy, right?
Yeah, he was in Grey's Anatomy. What else was he in?
He's the comedian in Watchmen. Jeffrey Dean Morgan.
He's in The Watchmen?
Yeah, he's the comedian.
Oh, I don't remember him from that.
Isn't he in Supernatural too?
I loved him in The Good Wife. He was in The Good Wife, and I like adored him, and then I see that he's going to be in The Walking Dead, and I'm so excited. And then I'm like, oh my God, it's so dark. the bat and the ugh. But I think like the worst villain in that show isn't the brain-eating flesh zombies.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
the leader of like the other guys.
Yep.
And I think that's kind of a good microcosm for the darkest. Any other films that we should watch? I mean, I think the analogy between addiction and demon possession is one that makes sense, one that I've heard numerous times over the course of my work. I'm sure we see it in like parents with adolescents that are kind of lost to them in that moment.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of
Yeah.
analogies there, although I don't know that that would be the reframe I would utilize within a systemic family context.
I will say, because we were talking about The Hills Have Eyes, I would say that's probably not a great one because there's a very awful scene in there and that can be very triggering. The Terrifier has many different themes that could be absolutely triggering in many ways. Yeah, just driving across the state of Texas is terrifying, and then like they add in.
Try living there for 9 years.
Oh, I did.
Did you?
Yes, I lived in El Paso and
Oh.
Killicoleen.
Oh shit! Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I
So-
at least got to live in Denton.
Yeah. Yeah, driving across the desert when there's like a sign that says no gas for 260 miles. It like makes that movie very believable. So yeah, if you live in Texas, have to drive across it, probably don't watch Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Probably really triggering. But yeah, I think to your point you were saying earlier about like psychological thrillers or movies where you're seeing the true behavior of people in these very difficult situations. I think for someone who already has a lot of issues with trust and intimacy and things like that as a result of trauma, watching movies like that can definitely continue to trigger that. See, this is why I don't talk to people. This is why I stay away from people. Look how they behave. So I think that can kind of further that. But I think things like Chucky, I'm thinking like more specifically like Bride of Chucky. I think that's just hilarious in so many ways. I think it brings a lot of humor to like a slasher kind of concept. And that might be a good way to kind of like get your feelers out for scary movies a little bit. Because he is just so funny.
Yeah, once you get past the original trilogy of Child's Play,
Yeah.
it just starts becoming comedic because eventually
He's great.
you get Jennifer Tilly in there.
Yes.
She becomes a doll. It's like,
Yes.
how is this not a straight up comedy?
Yeah.
They have a kid that doesn't know what gender it is. It's a comedy, but it's still like it's horror because it's a slasher villain, and it's just interesting to see.
And the death scenes are pretty gruesome.
They are, yeah.
They're not like, it's not like
Oh,
a...
they're horrific.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, because to put Jennifer Tilly's soul into the body of the doll, Chucky throws a toaster in her back.
Yeah, and which, funny enough, is hilarious in that moment
Yeah.
because they just got into a lover's quarrel.
Yep.
Yeah. But like it goes down in history when he goes, "Who the fuck is Martha Stewart?"
Yep.
I will like best part of any movie ever. Love that part.
Yeah, and I think it also depends on your story, what movies you should or
Yes.
should not watch.
Agreed.
Like, I think there are, like, what was the one with Jennifer Lawrence? Like, horror, Mother. The Mother?
Yes. I think I saw
When
that
they
one.
take the baby from
Yes,
her, and like I had
yes.
a preemie baby that they took, like the minute I had the baby, they took, and like my story and Jennifer Lawrence's story. Very different stories. I'm not saying it's the same thing, but I am saying like there's something primal in that moment. And I remember like watching that scene being like, oh fuck, I hope she just burns the whole thing. Well, and then, you know, but it's one of those moments where it's like, man, you don't expect it to tap into something within you. And then like, bam, it comes right upside your head.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we need to talk about Kevin.
Oh, that one's tough.
The movie is terrible. The book fucked me up
The
for
book
years.
is awful.
Yeah.
I never saw
Best
the
book
movie.
I've
It's
ever
called
read.
Kevin.
We
It's called
need to talk about Kevin.
Oh, we need to talk about Kevin.
Never heard of it.
Terrible movie.
But the book,
book.
wow.
The book.
So you would love it.
I have to check it out.
It's about parents of a troubled child.
Oh. It's already
That's all we'll
traumatizing.
say.
Yeah.
That's all we'll say. Don't want any spoilers if you've not
But
yet
it's like
read
the
it.
best birth control you'll ever have.
Oh, great.
So one of the other questions we got is, can horror movies serve as a tool for building resilience and coping skills? And if so, how might mental health professionals recommend their use for clients? Somehow my stomach's growling, and I ate today. I could see my clients like going rogue.
Oh,
Because
yeah.
I often talk to my clients about like brief exposures and like working their way up to different things. And I remember I've used this example like 100 times, but I had a client years ago that like struggled to walk with it, like ambulated with a walker, and we were doing some exposure therapy, and like my recommendations were like go to the mall, go to Target, like expose yourself to other people, or think because she had some interpersonal trauma. And she called me the next week to like cancel her session. And I was like, well, what happened? She's like, well, I took your advice and I went hiking by myself and I fell and I broke my leg. And it's like, that's not what I said. Like, that's not. So I could see this knife. I think it's an interesting question. But as I really spent time, like, I think it's great examples of like bad relationships. It's like maybe somebody who has a trauma history that struggled. I had a client the other, man, she's so insightful. Some of our clients are so brilliant. But a client the other day say, what I've realized is I'm colorblind when it comes to flags. And when I see a red flag, I think it's green.
Yeah.
And when I see a green flag, I think it's red. And I think there's a lot of elements and theme. Like I'm even thinking of like, it's not horror, but like the Joker Harley Quinn lore. And like that is a great, or the new Invisible Man, like great examples of toxic relationship patterns that look like love, but aren't, and could be a way to I guess Invisible Man would be a horror movie. The new one.
I haven't seen the new one. I just know about the original old one and how it's definitely more science fiction, but it's still a horror. It's like the horror era of Universal. But yeah, I agree with you. Like the Dying on the Hill, like Harley and Joker, not a stable relationship. It is completely toxic. Why do you think she is not with him after all these years? She's now with Poison Ivy.
Well, she was also his therapist.
Again.
Yeah.
That too.
Again.
Yeah.
A terrible psychologist.
Yes, yes. She helped him escape.
No wonder people don't trust their therapists.
But yeah, I can't really think of like a movie or like something to like that I would recommend, because again, like you said, it all depends on the person, because like there are so many things. You could have problems with your own self-image, you can have problems with family, problems with eating, there's millions of things you can have issues with, but there's I know actually there's for humor's sake, I know the one Nightmare movie had a girl whose mother was obsessed with making her a model. So her dream sequence was her at the dinner table with her mom and a bunch of like her clients or friends, and Freddie was literally like force feeding her because like she didn't want to eat. She didn't want to eat so much and get fat.
Yeah.
And then eventually it became more grotesque after a while. And just thinking like
7.
Yeah, that's what I was just thinking too. 7.
Oh, okay. I haven't
You've
seen
seen 7?
I haven't seen it. No.
Oh, that's such a good one. Yeah.
Like my list
The
of
gluttony scene.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, that one's gross.
Yeah.
so I'm guessing it's about the 7 deadly
7 deadly
sins.
sins. Yeah,
Okay.
it's a killer that kills people based on the 7 deadly sins.
Okay.
That's where I thought The Fall of the House of Usher was going.
Yeah.
After the first one.
Yeah.
And then I was like, okay, there's 6 kids plus the dad or something, but it doesn't.
Bummer.
Yeah.
And I wish I could remember it for this moment, but one of I think it's a Blumhouse character, the Looksee. But it was like an online, one of my clients shared it with me. But it's an online story. I'm going to mess it up, but it's this horrific looking dude. But the premise is he shows up and kills you if you can't get over your grief. And so it's this process, and it was right, like my brother died in 2020, and I think I learned about it in 2021, and I was not over my grief at that point in time. I mean, I'm not today. It just looks different today. But it's this character that, like, like somebody who couldn't get through their divorce and like couldn't move on, and so he shows up and murders you in this horrific way. A woman who loses a child and like can't cope with that child loss, and so he shows up and like murders her, or maybe it's a man, in this horrible way, And his like thing is like, well, if you won't live, then you might as well die. And like that's the premise of the show. And so I wouldn't recommend it for somebody struggling with grief. Like as I was watching,
Get
I was
over
like,
it.
This is awful.
over it.
But it is an interest. Like I think there's a lot of wisdom in
Yeah.
horror movies as well. But you don't often like. If you're stuck in the gore, you don't
Yeah.
see those pieces. But I thought that was a really curious premise. Like, if you won't move on and live, then yeah, I'll kill you. And
That's
the
essentially
whole-
like the whole story of like most of the Saw movies where the main character, like because of
yeah.
the choice that was made, his wife wasn't saved, and so now he's finding these either the people that have wronged him or just people in general out in the world that have just been horrible people, and they either make up and decide that they want to live after doing this horrific thing and change, or they stay in their ways and are stuck and just end up suffering the consequence because of it. And that's the one thing you don't see in horror movies. Like, you either change with your surroundings, or the environment and or killer gets you, and you're kind of stuck and you can't move forward anymore. That's a good thing with Halloween. It shows
Yes.
from the first movie with Laurie, she's a helpless
She's a
victim. She's
victim,
trying to
yeah.
survive. Come to now the newer timeline, as I call the age 40, she is ready to try and kill Michael. She
Yeah.
is stockpiled with weapons. She has a shooting range behind her house. She has a safe.
She's
She
got
has-
the basement
Yeah, she has the
trap,
bunker.
yeah, with the flames
go.
and
It's like she is
the
ready
trap
to
doors
destroy
on
him.
every, yeah.
It's like
yeah,
it shows
it's
you
great.
you
like
see the evolution.
yeah, you see her evolution. Unlike some characters where they're the hopeless victim and like they can't get up after they stumble on the ground. It's like, seriously, just hands down on the ground, feet up, run. It's like you can't. I mean, again, horror situations. It would probably be the same if you were like that way, but like two and two together, like you're not gonna go faster stumbling backwards doing the spider crawls. Like you can either change your surroundings or you get what you deserve. Like I'm sorry.
You're gonna like come
Very
up with a
empathetic
new, yeah, like a new type of trauma therapy. You're gonna figure it the hell out.
Well, that was what about
Yeah.
Bob, right? Like the whole like
Yeah.
death therapy at the end. He's like, "Well, I'm going to strap you to a bomb,
Yeah.
and you will learn to live."
Yeah.
That's not
Love
a horror
that.
movie, but it's a great movie. I think that brings us to our last call, which I forgot when we got started here today. So thank you all for reminding me. But this concept of the Marilyn Manson effect and how we have a tendency to blame those who are interested in the lure of spooky. For all kinds of different things, and as we're all sitting around here as very healthy, well-adjusted adults that are clearly interested in the lore of spooky, maybe this is a specific cultural phenomenon that needs to see itself out. So, what are we thinking about the Marilyn Manson effect?
Yeah, I mean that was.
So should wigs. I'm also ready for wigs to see themselves out.
done with
This is,
them, yeah.
oh man.
That was like really prevalent in my high school years. I remember it very much, and I remember just in like where I like grew up and just the nature of everything, and then I related to it a lot more like alongside Eminem. There was like that because he even talks about the Marilyn Manson effect in some of his songs, and so. That really hit me I like will never forget it because I'm just like, I listen to this music all the time and I love it. I love the message that he's sending because I actually hear the message. Like his curse words don't faze me. And it was just very interesting. And Eminem talks about it in his songs too, how we don't like to look in the mirror and recognize when we might be doing something that's causing our children harm. It's easier to blame society or blame the TV or blame a video game or blame music. And it's a lot easier to blame music if it comes from someone who doesn't look like you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was like a really big part of my like, I would say childhood. I was an adolescent, but it like really helped kind of shape some of my personality of realizing like, this guy's brilliant. Like, he's a brilliant person. And I actually like found myself like, I love these people more because they can be their authentic self. And even though it causes them like all of this crap that they both had to go through and still go through, I just really related to them in a big way. And I was like, Man, people suck. Leave them alone.
Yeah, it's the whole disconnecting the art from the artist. Because, like, you can say something controversial and something you put out there, but if you're not, like, either supportive of it or if you don't, like, fully believe in the message, you can either backtrack and show who you really are, or you can stand by what you say if you fully support it. Because, like, there's some things where, like, it's either they're saying it for a reason because they need to have a voice in the matter, or they're being forced to say it by, like, a record label or by a superior because they want to be more controversial to sell more records. But that's not the point, because, like, if the artist doesn't believe in what they're saying, is there any real truth in the matter of it? It's like we were talking earlier, separating the actor from the character. You may despise Hannibal Lecter for the person he is, but you don't put the same thing on Anthony Hopkins because he's just portraying the character. He does an amazing job as the person. That's why you despise the character so much. So it's just the distinction between what they spout or versus what they might be saying in real life.
When you talked about like Tim Curry as it,
Yeah.
but like to me, Tim Curry will always be Frankenfurter, and like there's no like
Fishnets.
Yeah, like it's always my like the sweet transsexual
Yeah.
from
You're not that
Transylvania,
scary.
like
Yeah.
always.
Yeah.
And
You're
there's
not a
no, he's not a spooky clown.
Yeah.
He's a creepy guy, and you stumble into his mansion, and what goes wrong? I don't know, but
Does really great dances and heels. It's
he does some fancy dancing, and causes you to leave your boring boyfriend, I guess. Set in Denton, Texas.
interesting.
Beginning of that movie,
Very
Denton, the
interesting.
sweetest place on earth. No, I agree with you. It was funny you were talking. My mom, so I had a 5-disc CD
Same.
changer, like everyone did
Yes.
in the early 90s.
Mine was in the trunk.
Yes.
Ah.
No, mine was like the big standalone 5-disc CD changer.
Yeah.
My mom didn't know how to work it, and she tried to take my Eminem CD, and she instead accidentally took my Ani DeFranco CD. So, jokes on you, Ma.
That's great.
Grabbed the wrong one
Replaced it with Teacher Dan.
and replaced some educational story. That's my mother. So I think it's probably time that we stop blaming the art and stop blaming the story for someone's actions, because I think for everyone who's obsessed with something horrific that goes on to do something horrific, there's an equal percentage of the population that loves the spooky and the horror and the story or the lore, but goes on to be healthy, well-adjusted mental health professionals. So
And it's like the whole thing, arguments of video games that create violent people. It's like, no, you do not do your research properly because there are so many things that counteract what you are saying. So stop using it as a scapegoat.
but we look for causes
Yep.
Yeah.
rather than looking inward.
Yeah.
Well, the Marilyn Manson thing, I mean, there was a huge fallout after Columbine.
Yeah.
Marilyn Manson,
Yeah.
like,
That was
canceled
the
shows.
big- yep.
He had to do interviews, all sorts of stuff.
Yep.
Because the Columbine shooters were
Because they
wore the trench coat.
So
Yeah,
they
they had the-
listened to it, but then there
Yeah.
was this rumor that got started that they wore Marilyn Manson T-shirts when they did it, and I think it ended up not being true.
Yeah. Well, Eminem talks about it in his song about how, like, in his neighborhood in 8 Mile, those kinds of shootings in schools happen all the time and nobody cares. But because this happened in a suburban neighborhood, now there has to be someone to blame. It's not poverty, it's not mental illness, it's not, being forgotten as a community. It's definitely Marilyn Manson's fault, 110%.
Satanic panic.
Yes.
Kiss is the sign of the devil, playing their records backwards,
Yes.
stuff like that.
All of that.
And I think moving forward, it's probably going to be social media, TikTok. And I mean, don't get me wrong, I think social media is shit for mental health, like
Yes.
in general. And I don't think it incites violence in a lot of different contexts. So I'm sure there's certain dark areas of the web that do. But
Yeah.
I think there's other issues there beyond social media consumption.
Yeah.
Well, thank you guys for joining me here today to talk about all the most horrific things. People getting cut up and stabbed and giving demonic
It's a
dolls to
delightful
babies.
afternoon.
Yes. So I
No better
appreciate
way
you
I'd like to
all
spend it.
sharing your knowledge here today. And upcoming pods, we have one coming up on the psychological impact of pets. We have a 2-part series, one for maintaining mental health gains during the holidays, specifically in the context of your family. The other one is looking at maintaining recovery during the holiday season. One of my favorites that I'm most looking forward to is Die Hard is the best Christmas movie ever. Go ahead and fight me on it. And last but not least, we also have a pod on fatherhood. So questions for any of these pods, please feel free to go ahead and shoot me an email. Kim at How to Be Happy Hour. No, is it Kimberly? Shoot, I'll try to get that. Try them both.
You can also ask questions on Spotify too.
Oh, you can ask questions on Spotify.
If
Do
you-
I know how to get those questions?
We will try and find that out. I just know.
Just ask them.
I know on the website you can post like questions when you're uploading an episode to like ask. So I might be able to find the analytics for that and shoot them over when we get a podcast. But yeah,
Nice.
so if you guys are listening on Spotify, excuse me, out of breath. Feel free to throw some questions our way if you have any. It may not be directly connected to AD podcast, but it could be anything mental health related that could be beneficial to a podcast. Who knows?
I should mention that Brandon's usually the man behind the camera. So he's always the one in the booth doing the recording. He does all the edits. But for this topic, he wanted to join us out here in front.
Yeah.
So thank y'all.
Thank you.